Yummy. That's good stuff. We are live. It is hour 5 of our mini marathon. Wow, that microwave makes some of those really hot, and some of them not so hot. So we're gonna start our discussion today on hour 5 of our 12-hour marathon. I think this is hour 5. Thanks again, Brian Tooley Racing and the guys from Airflow Research and SCAT and Vortec for helping out the channel as always. Today we're going to talk about bore versus stroke. There seems to be some common misconceptions, and while we're here, I'm going to be eating lunch also. So if you guys are in a time zone where you need to eat lunch, please. By all means, have some pizza. You know, whatever. This is lemon chicken pasta. It's awesome. Thanks to Lisa. But common misconceptions on bore versus stroke. One of the general misconception is that the torque, if you want to gain torque, you add stroke. If you don't want to gain power, you add bore. So what do you guys think? Let me know in the comments. Do you think that that's true? In fact, that's going to be our poll. Start our poll. Does stroke add torque and bore add power? Let me know what you guys think. We're going to take a look at bore versus stroke. And we can see that on some of the, factory things. 100%, nice. I like it. Good, it's going to give us stuff to talk about. So here's my question. If we take let's take a difference between a 4.8 and a 5.3, which is stroke length. The 4.8 has the same bore, same compression, head, cam intake, all that stuff. But it changes the stroke length. It also changes the rod length. The rod length will be a whole nother discussion. Does rod length change power? But the stroke changed on the 4.8 and the 5.3. If you look at a 4.8 and a 5.3, does a 5.3 make more torque than a 4.8? Obviously, yes, it does. What's our poll doing here? Not 100% anymore. Dang it. I kind of wanted that to stay at 100%. So again, we look at our 4.8 and 5.3, change in stroke length. Did it make more torque? Yes, it does. It makes more torque. Does it make more horsepower? Yes, it makes more horsepower. Was it because of the change in stroke? Well, we made more torques, and so it changed the stroke. So obviously those go together, right? The stroke must add torque. Yes and no. I would argue that any change in displacement, whether it comes from bore or stroke, will change the torque output. It will change the power output. Cubic inches. That's it. And we see that now when we go to the next step. So we go now from a 5.3 to a 6.0. That's a change in bore. We go from the 3.780, to a 4-inch bore, but the stroke stays the same. Did we change the torque? Yeah, we changed it a lot. Changed the low speed torque, changed the mid-range torque, changed torque everywhere. just like we did going from a 4.8 to a 5.3, where all we changed was the stroke length. Going to a different bore on a 6-liter, we changed the whole power curve just by changing the bore, including low speed torque. Why did it do that? Well, it did that because we changed displacement. So does it not matter at all whether you change bore or stroke? I would argue that it does. I would argue that you might do things for specific applications. Just like, things like rod ratio. And when we were talking about cams earlier, changing the NA power to optimize a specific size turbo at the very, very top of the RPM range and sacrificing low speed power. If that's what you wanted the cam to do that, you could do that. I would argue the same thing about bore and stroke. In the range that I talk about for this channel, where there are street cars and street strip cars, my recommendation or my testing has shown that displacement is the big thing, just like this 4.8, 5.3, 6.0 kind of thing. And we see that on other engines, the 302, 327, 350 Chevy deal. It's the same kind of thing. All of those shared the same bore. They just changed the stroke. But it would show the same thing if we changed the bore, because it would show the same thing if we went to a 400, which is obviously a change in both of those. But the thing is, if you change the displacement, a bigger motor makes more power. It makes more horsepower and it makes more torque. So however you make the thing bigger, it's going to, like, if you go from a 1.8 liter motor to a 2-liter motor, the 2-liter motor is going to make more power. That, of course, assumes a lot of other things. It assumes that you have the same, if you're doing a direct comparison, that you have the same cam timing, you have the same compression, you have the same camshafts, the same head flow, all that stuff. But are there times when you would want to change one versus the other? And the answer is yes, definitely. And what people tend to do is they're changing the bore and stroke, not so much so that they can get gains in horsepower or torque, but they're doing it a lot of times because of class restrictions and for changes in head flow. So if you look at extremes like Formula One motors or pro stock motors or any elevated level of professional racing, where engine builders, can adjust these kinds of things, you see that high RPM motors usually go with a short stroke and a big bore. And they don't do that because it won't make power or it won't make torque. But when you start adjusting those things and you can make the bore bigger, it's not that bore makes lots of power. We've seen in displacement makes the difference. But the thing that a bigger bore does is it allows you more head flow. And head flow is the thing that is the thing that the motor needs to make power. You have to have sufficient head flow to be able to support the power level, just like you have to have a sufficient amount of fuel flow to support the power level. If you don't have either one of those, you're not going to make the power. In fact, if you don't have the fuel flow and you have the airflow, you're just going to break the motor, which is not a good thing. But if you can have a bigger bore, the air flows more with a bigger bore, relatively speaking. And when you have a bigger bore, you can then go with either bigger valves or altered valve placement, bigger ports, all the things that you need to do if you have the luxury of designing a completely new motor and cylinder heads like the guys from Yamaha when they're developing motors. You have the ability to make and place those things, however you want to try to maximize that. And you would do that with lots of bore size. There'd be other reasons why you might not want to do that and might want to make it a specific combination of bore and stroke. For packaging, you want to make the the block itself, the motor, the complete motor assembly, a specific package size. And in order to do that, you have to make the thing a certain bore center, and the head has to be a certain dimension. So there'd be reasons to do all that. The things that we look at in these extremes, like bore versus stroke and things like that, we don't need to look at that when we're talking about a junkyard motor. You'll be able to make the amount of power that you want. You don't have to go get a L31 350 Vortec motor from the rec yard and go, you know what I need to do? I need to sleeve this. And then I need to de-stroke it and run a 4125 bore, but then put a 3-inch stroke crank in it. Yes, you can do that. But if you went to a 4125 bore, which is good because it's bigger, but then kept the 348 stroke in it, or put a 4-inch stroke in it, even better, and just made the motor bigger, it's gonna make more power because bigger does that. If in our extreme examples, you're looking at Formula One or Pro Stock or whatever, Pro Stock has a 500-inch rule right now. I think that's still current, that you can make the motor 500 inches. If they would allow them to make them 600 inches, they would make them 600 inches because a 600-inch motor is going to make more than a 500-inch motor. They're not choosing small displacements and RPM. They're doing what they're working within their limitations. And so no one would ever do that. You would always make it bigger. So in the, like I said, in the area that we're looking at, typical small block Ford, Chevy, big block Ford, Chevy, Buicks, Dodges, whatever, all these things, I don't think you should go out of your way to try to find a particular bore and stroke combination. If you're, especially if you want torque, just make it bigger. However you can achieve that is going to be good. And then usually with us, if we're trying to decide what to do, we're not deciding between like absolutes. Oh, this is definitely, from an engineering level standpoint, this is definitely better. Okay, that's great. But it's also really expensive. So let's do the thing that's going to get us the most for the least amount of money. And that's just making it bigger. So if you're doing a small block Chevy, since you don't want to sleeve it, that's going to be really expensive. Or buy an aftermarket block that has a big bore. That's a good idea because bigger is better, but it's also more expensive. So you just take a 350 and make it into a 383. You just put a different stroke crank in it and make it bigger. This is particularly the case if you're wanting like lots of average power production. It's not going to do anything less than if you were to put a bigger bore on it. It's just much less expensive. So the decision doesn't come down to bore versus stroke. It comes down to what can I do, what can I get, and for how much money. And that's why we would do that. Those decisions are much more important than, I know that we like to, especially after people have had, been to happy hour. I know that they want to discuss all of these things like, what does a rod ratio do? What's the dwell time? What do these little dimples in the pistons do? All of that stuff is fantastic. But it's at a level that the vast majority of us are never going to explore unless we had the, finances and the resources to do it. And then even if you did, let's say you bought the dimpled pistons and they're promising all of these different things from it, unless you also then went to the trouble of doing direct regimented back-to-back tests with that, you could only say that this worked. And you don't know how much better it worked than something else. Just like when somebody picks, oh, I made a 377 instead of a 383. I went with a bigger bore and shorter stroke, and it's way better. Well, is it? Did you compare it directly using all the same other things than the 383 or whatever other combination you want to compare it to? Did you do that? And in almost all cases, the answer to that is no, because it's just so cost prohibitive. So the decisions that we're making, like bore versus stroke or the ultimate camshaft or the ultimate turbo or whatever it is, usually come down to how much money do we want to spend? And the answer to that is almost always like as little as possible. And when that's the case, we usually get there, and we're talking about this discussion today, We get there by just making the motor bigger. Is anybody else having lunch like I am? Probably loud, huh? Okay, cubic inches make more of everything. They do. More power, more torque, all that. More stroke means less RPM, higher piston speeds for the same RPM. Why does more stroke mean less RPM? If you look at the mountain motors, again, if we use extremes, they're not limiting RPM in those. And they've got ridiculous piston speeds. How fast do you want to spin it when it comes to stroke? How much side clearance do you like to see between the lifted valve and the cylinder wall? I just finished porting and putting Cobra Jet size valves and FE heads and wanted to try them in my 390. How much are they missing the wall by? And did you see any gain by putting a Cobra Jet size valve in an FE head? Is that size valve even necessary in that port? I want both. If I had to choose, I would go bore, always for bigger valves and unshroud supports. Yep. People like Dennis Taylor said they went with a large bore 509 because they picked up power and attribute it to less friction than a 556. I don't know how that he can make that assumption. Because no form of professional racing where they're limiting displacement, nobody picks a smaller motor than that. Everybody picks that size motor. And if they went up higher, they would pick that size motor. So I'm not buying it. If somebody told me on a big block particularly that they didn't like the added stroke length because they had windage issues, I could see that. That's a different thing. But not from a power standpoint. I think we should have the most dedicated fan contest today. Person that stays with Richard for the longest portion of 12 hours gets a quart of 10-4. That's not a very big win. Maybe something better than that. Maybe like a camshaft. Has anybody been here the whole time? Just saw the No Prep Kings are doing a live feed from New England Dragway. That's cool. I did a big bore on my L28 ET with 89 millimeter KA pistons because I wanted to run L24 rods. Just made a lazy motor lazier. 7.9 to 1, better than the stock, but should have gone with flat tops. I agree. They did do pretty low compression on those, particularly on the turbo motors. I always ask myself now, what am I trying to fix? I'm at Costco. All I need is, and the same thing with cars. I'm going to give it a tune-up, and then you end up just unscrewing the radiator cap and sliding a whole nother motor and chassis underneath it. Ice cream sandwich. That sounds good. And torque applied depends on the length of the lever. I'm just in the backyard burning some wood. Do you have a burn pile or something? So good, so good. Better heads and more cubic inches. I figured Dennis Taylor was just fibbing about his actual displacement. Can't tell all the secrets. That kind of thing I would believe. Racers are known to do that. Camshaft is a generous prize. Yeah, but when you're a turbo cam guy like me. Now I'm sleepy, Bo. Uh-oh, big lunch. Did you have tryptophan? I've been here since the middle of the first one. Nice. Got my 219 cam yesterday, John. Thanks. Long Beach swap meet for possible parts deals. Is the Long Beach swap meet used to be a really good place for like real hard parts, much more so than the Pomona one. The Pomona one used to be okay way back, but I think Long Beach is more hardcore stuff now. Shadow Ops, what's going on? Was in the garden all morning. I know Lisa was out washing the dogs because they got wet and rolled around in the mud, because that's what they do. That's what puppies do. Bob, you're awake. You've been paying attention the whole time. Oh, I don't know. I think if we had a camera. Turbo Center's in the house. There's C10 running a 339. A 339 what? Will you be testing the Summit Racing aluminum LS intake manifold? What is that? I don't know what that looks like. Summit Racing LS aluminum intake manifold. Are you just talking about the fabricated ones? Or is there a different one? Oh, that's the new fancier version of the. I want to look at this thing up close. Summit Racing Max EFI LS intake manifold. I want to see what the inside of it looks like. Because to me, that looks like that it's going to be exactly the same as the fabricated Sniper intake manifolds. Back in the days of Ford, Chevy, and Dodge, they all had the same stroke lengths. Alan, you started at number 2. Walmart for dog food, $350 later. That is it. Steve, is a head swap worth it on my L26 Vortec engine? I'll have a single turbo. If I swap heads, I go from 100 cc's to 110 or 119. Is loss in compression worth it? When I did the head test on the L29, we put Brodix heads on it. And I think that the AFR 265s would be a better choice on that. But we put the Brodix heads on it and they flowed more. The chamber was bigger. They lost power down low. They gained power up top. And then having an aluminum head on there with a big chamber on it obviously is going to lower the compression. The compression's already fairly low on that. I don't know if it needs to be a whole bunch lower. It would depend on how much power you're trying to make. You probably could get there with the head. The nice thing about the aluminum head, though, is that it's not an iron head, which is good. The thing that I don't know about on the L29 heads is I don't know how resistant to detonation they are. I don't know if that design would be, if we had the same static compression, is that chamber design more or less prone to detonation? And I just can't answer that because I don't know. If you're trying to make, if you have a camshaft in that big block in that 454 cam and springs in it, and you have a turbo, and you could make the power that you want, I probably wouldn't do it then. So Scott, so you got a piece of sheet metal from your neighbor? Bore always determines power. Displacement always determines torque. Isn't bore one of the elements of displacement? Therefore, the poll question does not make sense. The poll question makes absolute sense, and it is actually the question that everybody asks. The bore doesn't determine power. The displacement determines the power. Rod to stroke ratio is a thing. It is a mathematical relationship, but does it make a difference? Looking for a new motor to put in my 92 RS. Should I go LS3 or small block stroker? If you can honestly choose between those two, I would put an LS3 in it. It's all aluminum, and you're not going to build an all aluminum small block. And you're going to be hard pressed to build a small block that makes the amount of power that an LS3 with a cam makes. So Bo, you had olives, broccoli, cheddar, and some penne and meatballs. Nice. This stuff is 14 gauge or something, much easier to work with compared to 18. Sheet metal in the car is very thin. I burn through it and grind through it and warp it. The Goldens are laying down with Lisa. They were outside, and now they had a bath, so they're laying down. Didn't you do a blower cam on a turbo and a turbo cam on a blower? All the cams do all the things. It's the same thing. Oh, you're doing a barrel burn? Do you have a turbo hooked up to it so it makes the jet engine? $339 small block Chevy. So what is that? What combination is that? Max EFI LS intake. Yeah, I think that's going to be the same. If the runners end in the plenum and don't go inside and cross over, then it's going to do what those fabricated manifolds do. I know you test so many things, but I'd like to see a series on turbo versus mods in regard to knock limited fuel. Yeah, we just don't have knock sensor technology in order to do that. Richard, have you ever done testing on a Cosworth Vega? Excuse me. I've seen them at shows and stuff, but I don't think I've ever seen one. I don't ever remember even seeing one run on the chassis dyno. And I know that I've never seen one run on the engine dyno. Richard, Pack 1218 springs any good? I don't know. I've never tried them. So I don't know what the specs are or anything. I'm in for the shorter stroke for less piston side loading. 2650 charge, 372 small block. Okay. Pack puts their values on the website. That's how I figured out how to get a dual truck spring. Yeah. Todd, let me know what the specs are on that. Okay, Summit has them. Turret 313 rate, 1410 coil bind. 600 would be 1740. So if you set them up at 1800, do they have the? Do they have the rate at one at the install height? They don't have that. I would want to know what the seat and open pressures are, and the Summit doesn't have that. SB2 or LS, which one is better? I don't know. I haven't done a lot of SB2 testing. I don't know if even SB2 heads flow what an LS3 head flows, but I don't know for sure because I haven't done a lot of testing on those. And an SB2 is not something that a guy would normally have. The idea of a long stroke and a lot of weight swing around must put a lot of load on parts versus short stroke cranks. Using one of your old tests as an example, the Chevy 305 with a small bore and long stroke versus a Ford 302 with a larger bore and short stroke. But the bore and stroke are not determining the power outputs of those two examples. Something else is. In that case, a lot of things are. But primarily head flow and head availability for the small bore 305. This is my first V8 build ever. I'm ignorant on the subject. Why does the LS3 make so much more than the truck 6-liter? Is it just compression and cams? Well, it depends on what truck LS or truck 6-liter you're talking about. The LS3 makes more power than the truck versions because it has a lot of things that are better. It's a 6.2 and not a 6.0, so it has more displacement. It has more compression. It has a better camshaft, and it has a different intake manifold. So it has basically everything going for it that a truck 6-liter doesn't. Although an LY6 that has rec port heads, well, it still has less compression as VVT. So that's why. No, oh, Dylan, no turbo on it. Yeah, Todd, I saw the 313. The 313 is the spring rate. It's not the open pressure, right? They're showing the spring rate is 313. That's not the same as the open pressure. Definitely not going to make it 12 hours. Your $40 Walmart phone, your Walmart phone's getting hot. Yeah. Does the LS3 have a smaller chamber than the square port truck? No, it doesn't. It's the same. LS2 is a 6-liter, and an LS2 compared to an LS3 would be completely different. It would have a different bore size. It has a cathedral port head and not a rec port head. That's a completely different intake manifold. £370 of open pressure on the springs. Is 130 on the seat and 370 open. Is the 370 open at 600 lift? Would you say it's worth it to put beefy internals in a 4L60? Yeah, Taylor, I'm sure that's supposed to be 600, right? Not 690. Yeah, 4L60, you're going to need to strengthen if you're making power. I'm looking to add power to pretty much stock L96. What's the best route to go? You got to tell me more information. What is it you're trying to get done? What vehicle is it in? How much more power do you want? What kind of idle do you want? All that stuff. A cam and springs and a tune is the thing that most people do to start out with. You could also do boost. Yeah, that was the big lift. 690 would be a lot. Yeah, a camshaft will make a big difference in power. Boost will make an even bigger difference in power. You can, you can make the bore bigger, make lots more power. So you could argue that on the 6-liter versus the 6.2, the 6.2 has a bigger bore and can take advantage of the head flow better. But did it make more power because of that? Or was it the 7 other things that they also changed? Anyone around Langley, British Columbia, or the lower mainland? I'll be looking for a hand tuning my Sonoma 4.3 for the turbo cooler intercooler. I'm not ready to buy HP tuners. Rob, this is actually a good question. Kind of off topic, but would you trade a little compression for grinding some material out of a chamber to deshroud the valves? Yes, on an application where, let's say that you're going to change it 1 or 2 cc's, because that's probably all you would be doing. When we did the 706 heads to put them on a 6-liter, we unshrouded the valves and took it out to the wall, out to basically a 4-inch bore size. And we picked up 13 to 15 CFM. So I think that's a good trade-off. The LS3 head's hard to beat for a factory head. It is. I mean, the only thing that you're going to get better than that in a factory head would be an LS7 head. What's the horsepower difference of just adding stroke on a mild 6-liter going to a 4-inch crank? So if you go from a 6-liter to a 400-inch motor, you can do rough math to get an idea. So if you had a cammed 6-liter that was making, let's say it made 540 horsepower. Flywheel. Divided by so if you did a 408, if your 6-liter was making 540, your 408 would make 605 if it retained the same specific output. What about unshrouding 317s? That's going to be less necessary because the chamber is bigger, not just bigger in volume, but bigger in diameter, the inside diameter or the outside diameter, whichever one you want to pick to describe that. 317s are bigger, which is why I think that a lot of those heads, the 243s and the 317s, why I think that they don't work as well on the small bore motor, because it overhangs the bore. But on a 6-liter, they work. But if you can unshroud them and make more flow, then I would do it. With the same stroke, a longer rod lowers peak piston force. That sounds well worth it. I had some work done to one of my motorcycle heads, and it feels a lot better up top with valves deshrouded. I still got to sell my 4-inch crank. Anybody need a dart billet crank with a thrust surface issue? What's the issue? Does it make it not usable? Off topic, are you a runner? I do not. I wouldn't call it a runner. More of a jogger, I think. Are you going to swap the 240Z? Yeah, originally I bought it to put an LS in it. Now I kind of want to put the RB in it. A K20, I won't do that. You want to run boost on the LQ9 with 317s? Okay. .243s is what came with the 5.7. It's already assembled. I'm not changing them. Those are good heads. 4200, swap it. No, that's motor's too tall. How's our pole doing? Does stroke add torque and bore add power? 85% are saying yes. We obviously need to talk about UFOs more. Todd, I have your camshaft here, and I have lifters for you. I'm gonna need to get a fan in here. It's trying to get warm, or I might go downstairs and do some of them downstairs. Richard, not to bring up Vizard again. No, David's great. I love David, but he has a new video where he claims 30 horsepower on a stock 2.3 EcoBoost by taking a tiny edge off the turbine volute. I would have to look at it. I'm not familiar with that, with what that turbo looks like or what the edge looks like or any of that. So it would be hard for me to guess on that. Hayabusa, the Metro. The guys from the Hudson boys have run bike engines in the Metros. Not a Hayabusa because it would be a 1.3 liter, so it'd be in a class that you would just want to put a 1 liter bike engine in. I think that's what they did. I'm not looking for a whole lot of power on my 5.3. I just want to beef up the transmission enough not to worry about it. Yeah, there are probably some minor things that you can do if you're just doing a cam in it. The Atlas 4.2 is a truck engine. That's why I call it a Vortec. It says Vortec right on the air cleaner assembly. I read it's actually shorter than the LS. I'm talking about from the pan up to the valve cover, or actually intake manifold. I think it's not going to fit in the Z. The RB that I have, well, all of the RBs are 6 cylinders, right? Mine's an RB25, so it's a 2.5 liter 6 cylinder. They also have an RB20, which is a 2 liter 6 cylinder, and then the RB26, and then they have RB30s too, right? Is that the diesel one? If one 350 engine with a bore of 4,250 and a stroke of 2.75 will make more power than a 350. Are you saying that you think that it will if everything is the same? It would depend on how you structure your test. If you structured your test to make them 8,000 RPM motors where you wanted to make 650 or 700 horsepower, and you put cylinder heads on there that would flow that much, then the bigger bore could help. But if you just put together two street motors, two 350 or 400 horsepower street motors, and did that bore and stroke combination and the normal bore and stroke combination, and then they were the same compression with the same cam timing, the same cylinder heads, and the same dual plane intake manifold, it's probably not going to make any difference at all. The SR, yeah, is the Nissan 4-cylinder SR20s. Yep. Some people also bore them. Yeah. Bore the RBs. They make them bigger. Put the diesel cranks in them. And they did that to didn't they do that to the L series Nissans also? For L65 is the reason I never boosted my LS2. RB30 block with the RB26 head would be cool. I thought I remember seeing stroker versions of the L series too, that they had the same kind of thing, that they made a diesel version of that L series motor, and that guys were doing stroker versions. Although, if I had to guess, I would say it's probably very, very expensive, which is why guys did a lot of small block 350s in the 240Zs, because that was a lot cheaper. The L series uses the diesel cranks to get to 3 liters. Yeah. You can get a GM Performance Parts 4L85E for a reasonable price from Jegs. An L33 stroker would be good, right? Or just an L33, an all aluminum V8. I feel like you like the Thai bike racing scenes. I do like the those are cool, but what I like are the boats. And I follow Boxed Diesel, I think is the name of it. And those things are amazing. It's the workmanship is fantastic, and I love that they race those things. I think it's awesome. L28D came in Maximas and forklifts and some boats. Yeah, the boats are cool. I really like this. I'd love to go over there and just have somebody take me for a ride in one of those. I think that those things are really cool. I remember seeing the I think it was in the movie Live and Let Die. No, it wasn't. What was the one after that? It's the one where they did the. Was it Goldfinger maybe? Where they did the jump where they twisted the car, but he was in one of those boats and they were racing each other with the long shafts on the propellers and stuff. I think that was Goldfinger. They have a supercharger bracket for the L28. I want to do, it might be Man with the Golden Gun. Yeah, not Goldfinger. That'd be way earlier. Man with the Golden Gun. That's what I was thinking of. I knew there was gold. I knew there was some kind of gold going on. Scaramanga and tattoo. And I think that was it. Wasn't it an AMC Matador that they did that jump with? And that was Christopher Lee, right? I think he's a big time actor. 87% stroke edge torque. I've seen some of the L series stuff. I've seen some of the NA buildups of those, of them doing displacement and compression and obviously side drafts. And then if you're really cool and you had all the money in the world, you'd put the OS Geiken head on there. Or they have a new head too that they recently come out with, I think. That's supposed to be some double wazoo thing. I'm sure is $1 million. Because the OS Geiken was like, was the unicorn of the L series stuff. Richard, are you going to do a big bang on the L28? No, I probably not, but I do want to run it though. The new L series is a Honda-based crossflow head. It doesn't need to be a crossflow head. It would be much better. If cylinder heads were tailored to the two different 350 bore and stroke, would engines make similar torque? I'm not sure I know what you mean. Are you saying that one of them needs a different combustion chamber than the other? Then aren't you changing elements then? Do you want different cam timing too because the bore is different? My point is that displacement is the big thing that changes horsepower and torque. And then whether it came from bore versus stroke is a tiny thing that changes very little, unless, like we're talking about, at high extremes where you could take advantage of, where you want to make lots of power and you need lots of airflow, and the big bore allows you to put a head on that has lots of airflow, and the motor can take advantage of that. Then in that situation, the bigger bore can help you make more power. Adding bore will affect power and torque, but not as much as adding stroke. I don't know. I don't know what you mean by more or less there. I just demonstrated that when we go from a 4.8 to a 5.3 and change the stroke, we added power everywhere. And then we went from a 5.3 to a 6.0, we changed the bore and we added power everywhere. So displacement adds power everywhere, and they both do that. Would a Nissan 4-liter handle boost like a 3.8? How similar are the platforms? I don't know anything. Are you talking about the new V6s? There's a Japanese company making new heads for the L series. They have a crossflow they're working on. Uses all Honda Valtrain parts. Dodge V10 Big Bang would be good. Did you ever get to test the unshrouded 706 heads on a 6-liter? Trying to figure out about what an LQ9 would make with 706 unshrouded with the truck Norris cam. I don't remember doing that. I think you'd see something on a if you unshrouded the valves on a 706 head on a 6-liter, I think you would see power gains from that, because on that application, it needed more airflow. We saw that when we did the comparison of the 706 and the 799 head on the 6-liter. 706 head did better down low, but then didn't make as much power at the peak. And so what I think is I think you would see more power because it now has the additional airflow. So I think you'd see gains from that on a 6-liter. So we're looking at, I think for the next video, we're going to look at static compression. Static and dynamic compression, I guess. Saw someone put a V12 M120 Mercedes engine in a 240. The guy that did the LS V12 has that V12 in a 240. Which is it? Does stroke add torque? Yes. Does bore add stroke? Yes. I mean, does bore add power or torque? Yes. They all do. Yeah, compression, dynamic, static compression, dynamic compression, all of the compressions. The man with the golden gun. The man with the cigarette lighter gun. That's what he had, right? He'd make it out of the cigarette case and stuff. I don't think I've tested two identical displacement engines with vastly different bores and strokes. There's kind of a limit to how far you can go with them and change those two things. And then again, do you test it at like that's kind of the discussion here, is do we test it at like a low power level, a medium power level, and a high power level? You know, the specific output that you would test it at and the RPM range and stuff would dictate whether or not one of those things is going to start to favor itself. Just like with head flow, if you put, you got a 300 horsepower small block 350 with Vortec heads on it, and then you put heads on it that flow 300 CFM, how much of a gain do you get? Not very much. In NASCAR, we would shorten the stroke as we overboard the blocks to maintain 358 cubic inches. They all made the same power and torque. Yeah, you guys probably weren't, if you're just overboring it, you're not changing the stroke. Or did you offset grind it, or did you have cranks made when you guys were doing that? You're going to be changing it that much, right? I mean, if you're boring it 30 over or whatever, or 40 over, how much ever you're boring it. They sell destroker kits for bears from 4-liter down to 3-liter. Bunch of offset ground strokes, yeah. That's kind of cool. So on the next one, we're going to talk about compression. Compression versus cam timing and dynamic compression and boost and all that stuff. Blocks were expensive, especially with all the work involved. Yeah, because you guys had to do, I don't know if you use production blocks or if you use dart blocks or those kinds of things, but you guys did a bunch of CNC like work on those blocks, right? That were lightened and stuff. Oh, the blocks had to have a GM part number. Okay. They sell D-stroker cranks for bearers down to 3.8, 3.6, 3.3 to help them make and rev to 10,000. Nice. That's high RPM stuff. And we're going to end our poll here at 85% saying yes. Stroke adds torque and bore adds power. And I will be back in like 5 minutes.